Okay, we need to get going. So that means it's my turn to talk. Yes, oh yes. And what I really want to say to you, it's lovely that I can never stop people talking. It's so great. I love the buzz in this conference, but really you do have to stop now. It's my turn. Welcome to this third International Creative Research Methods Conference. Woo! It is such a joy to see this community grow and develop. And I do have some really exciting developments to tell you about. But first, thanks to our sponsors, because without them, it would be way more difficult. So Quirkos, Policy Press, the Social Research Association, and Sharon Inglis. We're particularly grateful for the support of these four sponsors. They've been with us all the way through. They've sponsored all three conferences so far. Sharon was under the radar for the first two, but she's out in the limelight now. So if you see her, have a chat. The Social Research Association has sponsored the conference programme, and their chief executive, Tina Hauks, is sharing the conference for us. Quirkos and Policy Press both have stands, so do drop by and have a chat with them during the conference. Policy Press has got a lucky dip and all sorts of exciting stuff, and Dan's got offers and things, and they're nice people. Sharon has sponsored this evening's drinks and nibbles. Hurrah! So their support's invaluable, but we can't take it for granted that they will carry on sponsoring us. So if you know anyone who might want to sponsor next year, please tell one of the organising team. That includes me, bizarrely. We're also really grateful to the National Centre for Research Methods for giving us merchandise for the goodie bags. And if you don't know about NCRM's website, there are loads of really useful resources on there for people using all sorts of research methods. Well worth a look. You probably all know by now that we don't have any funding for this conference or any organisational support apart from our wonderful sponsors. I take the financial risk myself by signing a contract with this excellent venue for a 5-figure sum each autumn and then hoping to goodness we're going to sell enough tickets to cover the costs. So I'm also hugely grateful to every single one of you, including the people online. Hello, online people. This conference is organised by a small group of people. Most of us are disabled or neurodivergent, or like me, both. I'm supported by the Work Inclusion Project, also known as TWIP. Most of you will have been in touch with my support worker, Caitlin, and she works with Gary and Niobe there on the reception desk. Becca Jiggins, one of the founders, will be presenting her own research tomorrow because it's really good and not because she's involved with TWIP. I was not involved in that decision because I know her, so the other two people choosing proposals made that decision. TWIP supports academics and self-employed people with applications for access to work funding and then in using that funding. This has been great for me because I've got the usual lumpy neurodivergent profile. I can write a creative methods textbook, but I can't fill in an access to work application form. They also offer coaching. They've developed a unique disability work training course for people who want to do that kind of coaching, which is fully accredited by the Association for Coaching, meets all of both their academic and their practitioner requirements. So that's really great stuff. If you want to talk to any of the TWIP people, they'll be on the reception desk or floating around. Some little bits of housekeeping. I'm sure you've all already switched off your mobile phone sounds. Yeah, there's always a little dull for a few handbags at that point, or pockets. We love this venue. It's really supportive and helpful. There's a floor plan on the reception desk and one on the big notice that's facing you as you come in the door. So it's easy to find where the rooms are. There are arrows to show you where all the different rooms we use are. We have a quiet room called Win, which is available to anyone who just wants a bit of time out. The only time it's not available is between 1 and 1:15 each day when it's going to be in use as a prayer room. But any other time, you're completely welcome to go in there whenever you like. We have communication badges on the reception desk. So if you want a badge saying, I'd like to talk, but I find it hard to initiate conversation, you can take a green badge. If you want a badge if you just don't want to talk to anybody for a bit, you can put a red badge on. If people have green or red badges, please follow that kind of code, because that's really helpful for some of us. If you need to use the hearing induction loop during these plenary sessions, please make sure you're sitting in the front half of the room. If you need it and you're at the back, you probably can't hear me saying that. So that's a bit, anyway. There are staff to ask if you need anything. There's Jan here and Carlotta in work doing the hybrid conference, and Nick, who's floating around with very bright orange and blue trousers, if you need to find him, who's general tech support for any presenters who need it. If you need to know anything about the venue, ask the studio people. If you smoke or vape, this is a completely non-smoking, non-vaping venue, including on the terrace outside, which we can use through the door in here and the door in, I think, Buzz, further up. But that's non-smoking as well. If you need to smoke or vape, you need to go downstairs and out onto the street. And please don't consume any nut products. We have someone with a severe nut allergy, so please don't open any packets of nuts or nut chocolate or anything in the venue. How the in-person conference operates. There are no chairs for the other sessions, only for the plenary sessions, because you're all grown-ups and you can tell the time. It's presenters' responsibilities to finish presentations on time, because there might well be people coming after you. If you want a bit of help, if you want someone to say 5 minutes to go or something, just ask someone in the audience and someone will help you. For the online people, we have 2 volunteer coordinators this year, Camille and Julia. One or other of them will be in each session to help manage the chat and liaise with the tech person in the room, who will be able to pass on questions and comments from the online audience. We're very grateful to them for helping the online conference run smoothly. One more announcement for the online conference. We've had a very last minute presenter drop out. Ilga Lemanis, who was going to present, I think, in work at 2 p.m, can't make it. So the 2 p.m. session for the online audience will only be the session in Shine. So we might need to, whichever volunteer coordinator is listening to that, can you tell the other one and get the word out? That would be really helpful. I literally found out about that 5 minutes before we started this. I'm glad to say both programs look fantastic. People who are here often give up trying to choose between the different rooms and just pick one at random. Maybe that happens online too. Talking of sessions, I should say that we give people the option of how long they want to present for rather than dictating that. This means that you need to pick a session and stick with it till the next break rather than moving rooms in the middle of sessions, because the timings are all irregular and different. So that would be appreciated. Please don't record sessions, because some of the research being presented is sensitive or incomplete. And the last session of the conference, one of the last sessions, is being facilitated by Emily Bradfield, who's very good on creative methods. And it's where can this community develop next, beyond the conference, beyond the journal, which you'll be hearing about soon. We've got a lot of central stuff, but we feel like there's perhaps a need to, people ask me, can you do a conference here? Can you do a conference there? I'm like, I do one in Manchester, that's as much as I can manage. If this community is going to spread, we need to collectively figure out ways to do that. So if you're interested in discussing that or maybe helping with it, please go to that session with Emily at the end. I did say I had some exciting news to share. I've got 2 things, in fact. First, this conference is hosting the in-person launch of the new Journal of Creative Research Methods. Yep, we've got our own journal, and it's all my fault as usual. I have founded the journal, I'm consulting editor, and we have 3 excellent editors-in-chief. 2 are here now, the other one will be here at lunchtime. There's going to be a bit of chat by the 2 who are here after Jacqueline's keynote, and we'll also have some fantastic cupcakes this evening with the drinks and nibbles and a bit more of a celebration then. We're deeply grateful to Bristol University Press, who do offer a lot of support to the creative methods community. The first issue is available online. It's free to access, open access, until the 31st of December. The publisher's trying hard to get funding to make it open access forever, but that's quite difficult in the current climate, as I'm sure you can imagine, but they're doing their best. And of course, if they can't, or until they can, some articles will be open access, because some authors will have funding to pay for those. So we're doing the best we can to get it available, accessible to everyone. We will really welcome your submissions for future issues. If you've got some creative methods stuff and you want somewhere to write about it, you know, people have been saying to me for years, I don't know where to put this, which journal will take it. Journals don't like creative methods. Well, now there's one that really does. And we like alternative formats. We don't just like text, although that's also welcome, but we like comics, we like videos, we like all sorts of multimedia stuff. We like whatever you want to come up with. I know someone's planning a playable article, an article that is in fact a game. So, you know, whatever you can think of, we'll be interested. Yeah. So the other exciting bit of news is that I am incredibly honoured to have been invited to Keynote, the first Creative Research Methods conference anywhere in Africa. Ooh is right. Ooh is dead right. It's the Create conference in Cape Town, and I'm flying 2 weeks on Tuesday. Eek. ICRMC is partnering with the Create conference. We're doing all we can to support each other. Create conference, like us, has no external funding, but you know, we're going global. So that's pretty cool. I think that's quite enough from me. I will now hand over to our conference chair, Tina Hooks, who is the Chief Executive of the Social Research Association, which is one of our sponsors, and she's kindly agreed to chair the keynote sessions for us. Tina, do you want this one? Or that one? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Yes, I'm Tina Hawkes. I've taken over the Social Research Association about a year ago. Many of you might know and remember Graham Farrand, who did an amazing job running the SOA for so long. And so I'm trying hard to fill rather big shoes. It's wonderful to see you all here. I'm not going to talk much about the SOA today. I thought I'd save that for tomorrow. You have enough announcement today. If you want to find out more about us, at the back of the program, our training courses, and like I said, say more about it tomorrow. Instead, I want to use the time to introduce Jacqueline, because I think we're all here to hear the talks. So Jacqueline is one of those people who makes me feel like I'm not doing enough. Jacqueline Priego Hernández is a social psychologist whose expertise lies at the intersection between education and healthcare interventions. She's particularly focusing on the psychosocial well-being of youth and socially excluded communities. She has a keen interest in the experience integrative research methods, which is a good thing, that's why she's here, and in research skills acquisition. And her most recent project, which is I think what we're going to hear about, is the transnational education as capacity strengthening social research methods for sustainable development. And that's funded by the British Council, and it's done in collaboration with the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences in Mexico. As well as all that, Jacqueline is a chartered member and associate fellow of the British Psychological Association and a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. By now you know what I mean, that I feel I'm not doing enough. And because, having progressively attained leadership roles in international higher education, she's currently the Associate Dean for Global Engagement in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Portsmouth. So, what does it need to have? Today, we're very honored to hear you talk about teaching and learning creative research methods, mainstreaming the subversive. Jacqueline's going to talk for 37 minutes, she's told me. And then we've got 15 minutes for questions, both from the room and the online audience. And we've got volunteers to coordinate questions. You're going to have to use the mics, I'm afraid, so the online audience can hear us, which somewhat ruins the atmosphere, but we'll make the best of it. And then we have the journal launch. Sorry. It's all go. I'm handing over to you, Jacqueline. Remind you. No, this one. Okay, good. That way I can move. Yeah. Or do I need to remain in here so you can come? No? Okay, good. Thank you, and good morning here in Manchester, and hello to all of you who are joining us online. Welcome. My name is Jacqueline Priego, and I am very grateful for that kind introduction. I am delighted to be here with you all today. This is a platform that I very much value. And I wrote this because I don't want to forget to say that I welcome the opportunity to occupy this space and to be in dialogue with this community who I have followed for over a decade now. I want to especially thank Dr. Helen Cara and the organizing committee, not only for inviting me, but also for the fantastic organization that you have displayed in the conference. So thank you. I'm honored to be here today. And I'm going to share with you my ideas in relation to the intentional decision to teach creative research methods at undergraduate level. I'm going to discuss how we can use these methods to question hegemonic knowledge structures within our disciplines, and whether there is a risk that these methods lose their subversive potential the more ubiquitous we make them. Now, let me start by saying that in preparing for this talk, I had to go back to earlier points in my career and my development as a researcher. And it allowed me some space to revisit the work of colleagues with whom I used to interact in the golden days of academic Twitter. Now, one of them is Professor Inger Mewbourne, also known as the Thesis Whisperer, who has recently stated that actually the real purpose of a keynote is to entertain. Now, that's a tall ask, but I hope that at least I can take you on a brief journey with me today. So let's see how I do about this entertaining now. I'm going to proceed in 4 steps, guided by a very well-known journalistic checklist here. First, I'm going to focus on the what, when, and where, for you to know the context from which I have operated, and so that you can consider ways in which the points I make relate to your own disciplines. Next, I'll move on to my motivations for trying to subvert mainstream and hegemonic ways of reproducing knowledge. And I'll then show you how we can do this by teaching creative research methods. I will finish with some reflections about the future of these methods and their capacity to unsettle dominant narratives. Now, my goal here today, when you leave those doors or when you stop listening to me online, is to leave you with questions in relation to the ways in which we, as researchers and practitioners, can and should engage in teaching, learning, and training with the new generations. And this proposition with is intentional, and I'm going to get back to it throughout the talk. So, let me show you how we do this. As we heard, I am a social psychologist, and as such, I will draw on my experiences of teaching creative research methods module to explore psychological concepts cyclically. Now, before I move on to that, I just want to briefly give you some background about psychology, just so that we have a common understanding of what psychology is and some of the criticisms to the discipline. And I promise it's going to be super brief, so bear with me. To begin with, psychology is typically understood as the science, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the science of mind and behavior, considering the essence of what makes us human and our capacity to think, learn, form relationships, imagine alternative realities, and act accordingly. However, it has been documented that psychology and the behavioral sciences in general have historically relied on data generated by engaging with subjects, and that's the terminology used, subject. Now, WEIRD is an acronym that stands for Western Educated, Industrialized, Rich and Democratic Societies. Now, this is problematic because it is from these populations' data that the majority of inferences have been made about what are normal, typical, or expected psychological characteristics, when these groups are in fact not representative of the rest of the world. That is, psychology, to say the least, has a diversity problem. Now, the second point here is that the concepts that psychology students engage with include such topics as intelligence, personality, memory, motivation, emotions, cognition. Now, these concepts are typically approached from a Western, very much individualistic perspective. Historically, this has meant privileging the compartmentalization and isolation of different elements so that they can be measured. That is, there is also a problem of who from and how psychological knowledge has been historically produced. Now, the final point here is that this concern, sorry, I just lost myself in here. This concern with measuring and testing is not accidental. Psychology has evolved because it initially stemmed from philosophy. And in the process, psychologists have fought really hard to align it with the scientific method and demonstrating that it is a science. Today, qualitative research is an acceptable and fairly conventional way of conducting psychological research, and the power of the arts is recognized as a form of psychotherapy. However, as colleagues have noted, precisely because of this preoccupation with being a science, recognizing the value and potential of arts-based research is challenging, as art and science are thought to be opposites. Okay, just a second. Now, that was the what. That's the problem that I'm tackling here. Let me talk to you about the context. So the module I'm going to talk to you about was conceptualized well before the pandemic, and by then I had been acquainted practicing creative research methods and scholarship for a while. And the context here is also important in terms of where this module is taking place at the University of Portsmouth, where I have the honest pleasure to work. And there I had the unique opportunity of designing the psychology component of a series of combined honors with psychology. Now, when I say combined honors, this means degrees that are 2/3, one social science subject area, and then 1/3 psychology. And that's why it was a unique opportunity for me. In typical psychology degrees, there is a need to follow a certain curriculum so that we can comply with the professional standards of our professional body. Now, because these are combined honors with psychology, there is no need to comply with those standards. That is, we can deviate the curriculum from the canon. And I took it up, that opportunity, of course I did. And instead of focusing on the canon, what we have done is to try to approach this and select modules that allow our students a critical engagement with psychology while preparing them for the world of work. And those two principles, criticality and employability, were the start of me thinking about this module in particular. And I thought, you know what? A creative research module, research methods module would give my students some transferable skills. And I thought this could be related, for example, to current initiatives such as social prescribing, for example. I wanted to equip my students with tools that would enable them to engage communities in meaningful projects and collective mobilization, especially communities in conditions of vulnerability and so-called hard-to-reach groups. And here I thought of opportunities such as patient and public involvement, community mobilizers, and general research assistantship. And these, by the way, are some of the jobs that our graduates have gone on to take up after they finish with us. Now, that's in terms of employability. In terms of the pedagogical rationale, this is twofold for me. First, we know that the most engaging ways of teaching research methods entail immersing students in experiential learning. And there is a body of work that documents this by colleagues who have systematized ways of doing this. For example, in arts-based research and as well as computer-assisted analysis. What I wanted to do differently here, usually these are published in different outlets and different books. I wanted to bring all of this together and teach it in a module as a package for my students. And the second point in relation to the pedagogical inspiration here has to do with the idea that research can in and of itself serve as a pedagogical activity through which students get a deeper understanding of a given subject. The idea here in this module is to discuss and support students to try out creative research methods, and in doing so, enable the critical consideration of psychology and its practices. Now, a more personal, and I want to think of it as subversive rationale, was to connect the curriculum with less recognized ways of making and researching psychology. My inspiration here was the type of psychology adopted in community settings in Latin America, which interestingly resonates with how community psychology has been implemented here in the UK. And by the way, Manchester in particular has been a focal point of activity in this regard. Now, going back to Latin America specifically, this has to do with a rich tradition in decolonizing and indigenous methods without explicitly calling them that. The contribution of liberation psychology and the notion of conscientization are prime examples, as well as methods such as testimonials, theater of the oppressed, and participatory budgeting. By the way, there is a session on theater of the oppressed tomorrow, so don't miss it. Names such as Paulo Freire and Ignacio Martín Baró are associated with the preoccupation of Latin American psychology and pedagogy with enabling dignity and a critical view about reality amongst the poor. For me, as a transnational researcher and educator, including work that considers the realities of those who live multiple layers of disadvantage elsewhere, is my way of subverting the mainstream. There are many colleagues working right now on the ground with these communities in ways that align with creative research methods, but are not necessarily known by the mainstream here. In my view, this may be related first to language and second to the challenges of squaring very organic processes within the rigid walls of academic production. Now, take, for example, these two photographs. These are from the work of my colleague, Dr. Jorgelina Di Iorio in Argentina. Di Iorio has been working with people experiencing homelessness for over a decade. The photo at the top, what you can see there, is a community mobilization action through what they call a communal vote. I can expand on this in the questions if you want. And the photograph that you can see underneath includes the same people in the presentation of a poetry book by people experiencing homelessness just this year. Now, this is a kind of research, psychological research, that I would like my students to be exposed to. Now, if you want to know more about Jorgelina Diorio's project, you can scan that QR code, and the reference is in English as well, so in the bibliography you can check it out. Now, you may be asking, okay, so that's cool. So how do we actually subvert the mainstream? So how do you do it? I'm not claiming this is the way, but it is a way, and this is the way we have been doing it for the past few years. We use an interactive movement of teaching and learning with students. See, with is important. I'm going to get back to that. First, for a selection of topics, we discuss how concepts, methods, and tools typically employed in therapy, pathologization, and testing could be used for psychological research through the lenses of creative research methods. For some other topics, we incorporate ideas grounded in participation and activism that characterize practices in community psychology. In this process, we have also tried and tested experiential and immersive techniques that prompt students to try methods and think about psychological concepts through those methods. We have also undertaken a process of search and discovery of the most appropriate methods to evaluate learning so that they align with the ethos of the module. Now, let me show you how this looks in practice. So this is from our lecture on visual methods. And when discussing these methods specifically, we start by examining how psychology has historically engaged with visuals. So we focus, for example, on how still images are used to test, measure, and legitimize psychological research in relation to individual characteristics. So, for example, intelligence, personality. And in particular, how they have been used to visually classify what were believed to be typical features or what were supposed to be criminal traits, which is the image that we have on the left. Now, we can also recognize this individualistic focus when considering the use of drawings in developmental psychology and how research has documented their use for a range of objectives, from measuring developmental level and intelligence to attachment and self-description, as well as clinical assessment and treatment. Now, the use and consumption of research has implications. For example, there has been research, I highly recommend this book, documenting how governments have used brain-related images as evidence to justify intervention in the early years. This image, for example, by Berry, has been widely used to emphasize the role of parents and rearing practices in children's development, moving the focus away from the material and social conditions that, in fact, shape brain and social development. So that's the mainstream. How is it that we can change this with visual research? Now, this slide shows some data from the Children and the Public Sphere project. Now, this project was conceptualized by Professor Sandra Jurcelovic, who I have had the fortune to have as my teacher and mentor for my entire career. She started it almost 20 years ago, but I still refer to it today because of the lessons that I derived from it. So Professor Jurcelovic had this idea that I found fascinating as a master's student, because I had the background of the mainstream that I just presented to you. And what she said to me is, let's use drawings to engage children to express their understanding of the public world and its institutions. Now, she has worked on a concept called the public sphere, which is by Habermas. And in this project, I contributed the Mexican sample, and over the years, we amassed more than 700 drawings from a number of countries. Now, what is it that we wanted to understand? Historically, in psychology, it has been acknowledged that children start their lives focusing mainly on the self, and as they grow older, this focus changes progressively to engage with the perspectives of others in a relatively linear trajectory. So, for example, when you think about very young children, their concerns typically have to do with their toys, their family, their immediate social circle. Now, the expectation is that as they grow older, this is going to change because they become more socially aware, not only of others, this could be persons, this could be institutions, but also of the influence of those perspectives on their lives. Now, we call this process decentration, and we wanted to see the effect of age, context, and culture on this expected linear trajectory. Just a second. Now, we use drawings to seek the views and knowledge of children in their own right, rather than trying to diagnose or measure their abilities. For this, we had a 2x2 design with children from two age groups, 7 and 10-year-olds, from two social contexts each, affluent and deprived, in a number of countries. Now, we did find that age does contribute to decentration in line with traditional trajectories of social development. However, when we compare drawings from Brazil, Germany, Mexico, and Romania, which you can read this reference, we identified that this linear trajectory applied mainly to children in affluent contexts and individualistic societies. When we consider children in the context of poverty and more collectivistic understandings of the self, we identified an acceleration of this process. Now, how did we identify this? Well, we analyzed the drawings by looking at the elements that they had. And some of the drawings of these younger children that had elements that we would expect in older children. How do we know? Because they related to institutions or to the world of society or to others, so not the immediate world of the child. Now, I would contend that this research shows us how, instead of focusing on deficit, drawings can be used to engage children in a pleasurable activity and to understand development in context. This project is, in addition, a very good example of generating research with non-weird populations. Now, one thing I should have explained within my talk is how we actually did it, okay? So we have this academic concept of the public sphere, but we cannot go and ask children to draw the public sphere, right? And so what we did is that we operationalized this and adapted depending on the country. In Brazil and Mexico, because in Portuguese and Spanish, community works very well, is a term that any child would understand. This is exactly what we asked. We asked them to draw their community. And after that, we coded all of the elements in the drawing based on the theory. So trying to spot to identify whether the elements were from the subjective world of the child or from the objective world of society. If that makes sense. Okay. Now, let me move on just to give you another example, which we discussed in relation to representations of care by carers themselves. Now, we do this to illustrate participant-produced photographs and solicited diaries, as well as how these methods can illuminate our understanding of ideas, values, and practices about relational concepts such as care. Now, in contrast to the previous project that I presented, this was a very small-scale endeavor involving 7 university students here in the UK from a range of disciplines and backgrounds. Now, what they have in common is that all of them act as a carer for a friend or a family member who could not perform daily activities without their support. Now, in the classroom, this is an opportunity to discuss how a temporal dimension can enrich a cross-sectional data set, because actually what I asked participants to do was to produce a photo diary and to take a picture a day for a month, and some of them produced many more than that. And in discussing this, we considered how is it that we can focus on unstable health conditions and the evolving practical, emotional, and material adjustments they demand from carers. Now, considering visual data is also a good space to discuss the complexities of data ownership and sharing when they are co-produced with participants, as well as creative ways of seeking consent. This latter point about consent is especially important if we aim to be inclusive and ask research questions which require data from resource-challenged, illiterate, or non-verbal participants. Now, the next 2 slides, they are very much just to show you very quickly some of the points that we discussed. Now, I hope that by now you have got the gist about how is it that we actually do this. We take one of the creative research methods, related to how it has been used in psychology, and then we spin it to show how it can be used to analyze psychological concepts from a very different perspective. Now, in doing so, we not only consider data collection methods, which is what I just presented to you, we also consider creative analysis. And one of my passions and a point that I hope to expand on later on has to do with collaborative analysis. And I have implemented that in relation to those photographs. I have also tried to analyze collectively with children. This is coding done by children about those drawings. And so this is something that we also discuss within the lectures. Now the next slide is also to expand on other points that we discussed. We also discussed dissemination. So in this case, what you can see here is like just contrasting to the traditional book chapter, and then a participant-led exhibition that we held in relation to the student cares project that I just presented to you. And this is something that, again, we discussed within the module. Now, that's the teaching, kind of the standard lecturing. Let me give you a flavor of how we teach the more practical section of our sessions. Now, the images that I'm sharing with you now relate to the practice of collage making, as you can see. Now, one of the aims of this hands-on approach is that students try an exercise firsthand, become familiarized with the prompts at the level of the level of direction that participants may need, as well as the practicalities involved. On a more fundamental level, however, we would like our students to have fun and a safe space to create and reflect. Now, this point about fun is one that is very close to me because it has to do with how I have evolved as a researcher and educator. If I had given this talk 10 years ago, I would have contended that the more transforming learning experiences are often painful and they have to do with trying to master a certain content. I still believe that today, but I have also seen the benefits of being intentional with engagement with pleasure. And I think that this is one of the points through which creative research methods could evolve, that is by embracing even more joy, leisure, and play as active spaces of resistance in line with feminist methods and scholarship. Now, because of that, because of our focus on fun, we try for this session as much as possible to furnish our students with stimulants. And by this, I just mean sweets, magazines, and colorful stickers. Now, these are our students' creations when reflecting about their student journeys at university. And here I must acknowledge my colleague, Catherine Munden, who I think is with us online. So hi, Catherine. She has taught the module for the past couple of years at least. And some of the images that I'm presenting here to you were taken by her and produced by her students. So now, another example that I have here, this is also courtesy of Catherine, and she took these pictures this year, and they relate to self-portraits produced for one of our lectures on participatory methods. I could expand on this if you want me to during the questions. Oh, by the way, I should have said, a copy of the syllabus is included in your electronic swag bag, so you can have a look at that later on to see how it all looks together. Now, that's the teaching and learning. How do we know what students know? How do we assess them? Now, what I'm going to show to you now, it's something that fills me with pride because it's spontaneous feedback. Hi, Jacqueline, a dissertation student of mine told me today that a recent maybe session you gave on research methods involving some sort of taste tests was the best she had during her degree in terms of how clear it was. I said I would pass that on. So this is about a lecture in which I incorporate taste and smell as I prompt students to write the method section of their dissertation. It's not about this specific module. I wish I could tell you that the feedback that I have received over the years has been as positive as that. By the way, it has been overwhelmingly positive. However, I have learned along the way, specifically in relation to assessment. Now, this goes back to when the module was conceptualized, and due to my training, before the pandemic, I had the materials, the syllabus, everything ready, but the lectures had to be written. And then I went on maternity leave. And I delivered my baby, and my colleague Adam Harvey delivered the module for the first time. When I came back from maternity leave, Adam had some feedback for me in relation to some specific parts of the teaching, but also in relation to assessment. But I kept the assessment. I'm going to tell you what I did. So we had two pieces of assessment. The first one is a 10-minute podcast or a video for a lay audience. And the second used to be a 2,000-word essay, not any essay. We asked students to critically evaluate the claim that creative research methods have a lot to offer to psychological research, but that we still need positivistic approaches if psychology is to advance as a science. And I think you can guess which of the two our students preferred out of these two artifacts. Now, luckily for students, Catherine London has now changed this, and what students now produce is a 2,000-word creative portfolio in which they can draw on the activities they have already done. Again, in line with the ethos of having fun, they can have fun and reflect on those artifacts and what they would do different next time they apply it. Now, Catherine has also performed changes not only to the syllabus internally within the module, but also to the curriculum. When I conceptualized this module, my rationale was that this was a very specialized module, so it would be at the very end of the degree, so the last semester. What she has done is that she brought it forward, so it is in the final year, but in the first semester. And this was a great move because it has allowed students to taste creative research methods before they produce their dissertations. And I hadn't realized that. It was only when having a chat with her about this conference that she mentioned that. And one of our students has been very kind in allowing me to share some of the insights from her dissertation. This is from Isabella Cosbrook. And there are many things that I could share with you about this piece of work. Let me start by saying what the study is about. This is a study about nerd subcultures from the perspective of women and non-conforming individuals, with a focus on a collectible card game. Now, what I particularly enjoyed, apart from this very specific and inclusive focus, is the stimulus that Stella gave to her participants, which was this for a collage about what a nerd is. And what she prompted her participants to do was to produce a collage that they could do either online or offline, produce using any tools that they wanted, and they produced these great artifacts that you can see here. Now, what you can see on the bottom right is a photograph of Stella's analysis using mind maps. Now, I should stress that her thesis documents a journey that includes the evaluation, gatekeeping, and finally belonging in a context that typically privileges white cisgender men. Now, so what about this? Okay. What are the implications of the training of new researchers on creative research methods? When preparing this talk, I questioned myself about whether we could say that we are doing enough to subvert the mainstream way in which our students learn our subject. I believe that the classroom is a powerful space to start, and that creative research methods offer the potential to question hegemonic ways of understanding people and the world. Now, another equally important question is whether by virtue of making creative research methods more ubiquitous, we run the risk of them losing their contesting power, being applied instead in a mechanical and tokenistic way. Now, for those of you who have been long enough in this, you would know that an example of this happened in the early 2000s in relation to participatory methods, in particular in their application in international development, after multilateral organizations and international agencies adopted them more widely. Now, I ask this question because, after all, our pedagogical engagement, at least mine, is still tied to the administrative boundaries of higher education institutions. Engaging our students with deeper experiences that resonate with collectivism and decolonial practices, and here I am thinking specifically of trying to teach creative research methods in relation to activism, would be possible but challenging in such a setting. Similarly, our materials, such as the readings we assign and the works that we cite, remain typically, although this is about to change with the journal, remain in a format that is easily digestible and conform to the presentation and standards of academia. Those of us who have attempted to cite obscure references, and I have been given that feedback of obscure references, are met with engagement challenges from readers. Now, my conclusion in relation to this is that there is no such risk that creative research methods are going to become mainstream and are going to lose their subversive power. And this is because of at least two reasons. First of all, because even if we teach creative research methods, they are yet to be conventional or pervasive. For instance, and this is an earlier point that I made, many colleagues in the Global South are right now implementing indigenous arts and technology-based research. However, many of these projects continue to be published under the banner of qualitative research. This relates to the point that I made about certain disciplines embracing the qualitative movement, but creative research methods still being stepped too far away from dominant ways of producing knowledge. Now, the second point, the second reason why I don't think this is the case is because I hope to have shown to you what our students and youth in general are capable of, just with that dissertation in particular. And I have been amazed by the types of problems and research questions they are willing to engage with. Now, they, our students, will continue explaining reality in a critical and transformative way, independently of whether we teach creative research methods or not. They have the potential to be critical. We just need to accompany them in the process. Remember the with at the beginning of my talk? That's it. Now, I wanted to leave you with this quote from Paulo Freire. To me, this is the essence to avoid a tokenistic approach as creative research methods move forward as a movement. Caring about those we research with and being humble and committed enough to share the realities for as long as the process takes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful, so refreshing to you have something.
No, you got the
That one's wrong. Right, we'll be back. Here we are, back at technology. Thank you, Jacqueline, for this really refreshing talk. And while you were talking, I was wondering about the subversion and the mainstream, and I think you answered it beautifully at the end. Questions. So I would like to suggest we take 2 or 3 questions at the same time. Do we get a sense for some of the similar concerns you have, and we can maybe get as many questions in as we can. And the first round goes to the room, and the second round goes to all the audience online. And I've got the camera around with the microphone, so all our participants online can also hear us. So here we go.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Really loved it. Sorry, can I work? Okay. I'm trying to teach with creative methods as well, and I've also struggled with questions around assessment. I noticed a change in your assessment strategies. My question is, because this is a question I've gotten from my students, and I was wondering what answer you would give. 2000 portfolio of creative methods. You can submit a poem, a picture, a zine, whatever. How does that count in terms of words? You know, so if you submit something that is text-based, they are quite easily able to see the word count. If it's a picture, what is a picture worth?
That's a very good question. And we're going to take three, right?
Yes, three more questions.
I was really struck by what you described in that leaning into leisure and pleasure and joy and play. And I absolutely agree. I think that experience and learning can connect people and immerse them in the learning. But I think in my experience with research, people can be quite frightened of getting things wrong and that it's not correct or that it will be challenged by someone. They try to anticipate all the different perspectives on it, and that can crowd out space for joy. So I wondered how you encourage people to kind of overcome that barrier.
Thank you. I saw people nodding in the room.
Thank you so much for that talk. That was really fascinating. And I think
Microphone close to that.
closer.
Better.
Oh, intimidating. I think my question quite nicely builds on what's already been asked before. And I wondered what tips would you give us who wish to embed kind of creative assessment, not just to modules that are about creative methods per se, but also kind of more mainstream educational modules. When we're in a context where we're increasingly realizing that a traditional essay isn't always the best way, but our students can feel quite uncomfortable embracing those creative challenges, and they're obviously concerned about, you know, their degrees and their grades. How can we encourage them to embrace creativity throughout?
Well, thank you. So I'm going to start with the question about what a photograph is worth. Now, I would say, and this is my first reaction, I may revisit this later, but my first reaction would be because the focus typically is on standardizing, and this is for those colleagues who are joining us online from other countries, this is just the requirements that we have in this country. Institutionally, we need to have standards. So what I would do in that case is to have the word count as the actual engagement with the artifacts, the reflections. And then I understand what you are saying, and I know it wouldn't be the same to have a point, because if you have to produce it, you kind of think about it yourself than just produce a picture, but then they would count the same, and they wouldn't be part of the word count, if that makes sense, because that gives you control, because in the end, it is about controlling kind of the space. And that would give you control about the word count of the actual reflection that has to be grounded on academic references, etc. So that would be an immediate answer for that. Now, in relation to how to encourage students, well, as you can see, I myself struggle with that. For example, I started with that relatively rigid format of the essay. And I was reluctant, I didn't change it. It was my colleague, and that's why I acknowledge it was her idea to change it. And the one thing that has worked for me, and I share this with students, I try for this not to be cringe and not to overshare, but usually it's talking about my own experiences and how my thinking has evolved. So for example, it has taken me a while to come to an audience like you and share that I used to be in favor of those types of assessments that would may be painful, but I used to condemn. You would struggle with that, but you would learn. And so for me, it is about showing how relevant that can be. In the case of my students, one thing that really motivates them has to do with the world of work. So how can I apply that? Where would that be relevant? And that's why I mentioned employability at the beginning. So what is it that you can do with this? What are the jobs that are out there? And there are other modules in which I am much more frontal, if you want, about employability. But here, because we are discussing research that has to do with health, with education, I think the connections are more evident, if you want, like we can see how this can be applied in schools or in hospitals. So patient and public involvement is one thing that I have emphasized to them. And so those are, I think, the two strategies that I can think of, like one, talking about my own experiences, depending on how comfortable I feel with that.
And the second is trying to connect the module with a motivation. And typically, well, our students, even if they love a lecture, they have that motivation in the end to apply that in their work. So that's what I would say. Now, in terms of creative types of assessments, as you can see, I'm not the most creative one because I didn't have a very creative assessment. But one thing that I would say is that one way of giving students control is to anticipate as much as possible about the assessment. So that question about what does it count to have a photograph, so try to anticipate all of those points. So for example, for the podcast and the video, I have either or because I wanted to give students options. I remember once one student coming to me and saying, "Oh, I want to do a podcast with my accent," and I said, "Well, if I was worried about that, I wouldn't be here. So just go for it." It was great, and but it's not only encouraging the students; it's also again anticipating what else can they ask. So we have put in place support for students so that they can ask a technician if they have any doubts. Typically, I find that students are very well acquainted with technology, so they are able to produce amazing outputs. But if they need any support, that's another point that I would put in place, especially when it has to do with technology. Now, the other thing that I would consider is, again, standardization. I'm sorry, but this is just the constraints, institutional constraints we are in. For example, for other modules, we have tried to have collective assessment, and that is a research project that students conduct in a group. Now, I had a colleague visiting from Brazil, and she was horrified when I said that they actually have the assessment as a group, but they get individual marks that are not shared. They are not the same for the whole group. They depend on how much they have contributed. And for her, this was anathema. Like she said to me, "But in the real world, you're going to work in offices and then you will do more than others because that's just how it goes. If you want to progress it, you will just do it." But for us, because of our regulations, this is what works best. So that's the other thing. You try to have control and to align your decisions in relation to your institutional constraints and to acknowledge them that in an ideal world, yes, it would be great if they could all share the same mark, but it's just not possible. Hope that helps.
Fascinating, thank you. We're going to the online community questions from there.
Right, 3 questions, right? Perfect. So we have one from Charlotte that the volunteers recommended I pull out. What is the least threatening creative method that you have used, almost a gateway drug to more creative research approaches? Then let's do one from Joanne Irvine. What challenges do you face getting relevant stakeholders to believe in the legitimacy of creative research methods using qualitative data? And then let's do the volunteers said Sarah Moore. Sarah Moore's question: how can we demonstrate the value of creative methods and what they bring?
Wonderful, thank you, Jan, while you're thinking, and thank you to the volunteers for monitoring the chat. And to everyone online, please keep submitting your questions. Wonderful to hear from you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with the first one. For this is purely based on my experience. I would say for adults, photographs, because right now with social media and mobiles, we are taking photographs all the time. So that would be kind of the introduction. Now, it depends. For someone who really likes to engage with the material and not necessarily with a mobile phone, for me, that would be collage and journal making. So I ask my students, for example, to give a go at journaling just for one day.
with very basic statements about, say, 3 things that you are grateful for. This comes from mindfulness, and there are many ways of doing this. And but it is something that I think is a short journal entry they can sustain for a while, and it really allows you to see your progression. So that's another thing that I would do. Or combining both, as with the research with carers, it could be a photo a day that represents what you have done. And but for me, that would be either or. For children, for me, as you have seen, what works is drawings. But I think the premise that we give the child needs to be very gentle. And that's why, for example, in that project, it was super helpful that Professor Jurcelovich at the time, she had command of thinking about the best word, and this is very difficult when you are working across different countries. And for us, kind of giving the word community, so just prompting the child to produce something for you. But if your research question is super specific, to try to operationalize it at the level of the child. So that's not dumbing it down, it's just talking the same language that they would talk. Now, I think that second and third go together in terms of stakeholders and the value of like how to convince stakeholders. My belief is that, and this is why I keep saying, mentioning the mainstream, my belief is that the best we can do as researchers or practitioners is to continue pushing. That is to continue, if we give up, if we don't, if the next project, we don't put it forward, we'll never know whether it is actually going to get funded or not. And you would be surprised. I have seen initiatives, and I keep an eye all the time on the region and initiatives from the local councils, for example, and there is more and more, at least where I am based, there is more and more appetite for research and for creative research methods. Now, as to what the magic word would be to convince them, I wish I had the answer. I'll have to say that I don't. But I think there is a reason as to why participation, which I mentioned in the past, was co-opted in, say, 20, 30 years ago, precisely because it has something to offer in relation to co-creating and making decisions at a local level. Now, I think the last question was about the value of creative research methods. I think that goes in line with what I have just said. I think other people have written entire books about that, and they not least Helen. Yeah, so I'm not going to even try to answer that in a question here. I don't know how we want to proceed now.
Well, we've wonderfully arrived at time. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. There's one thing to say before the deserved applause. Jacqueline is around for today and tomorrow. So any questions you couldn't ask now, please find her at coffee at lunch. She'd be more than happy to continue this really fascinating conversation. But first of all, thank you, Jacqueline. And I think now we're going to one of the momentous occasions of this conference to do with the poster here.
And we know. Why don't we know? Behind you.
You're standing above.
We're going to need
How many microphones?
You're going to wait for
Just the one is fine.
Okay, well, I've 5 minutes, right? I have 5 minutes. So I'm going to do in reverse order of things. We'll start with thanking people, and then we'll introduce ourselves right at the end. Will that work?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I just want to start by thanking Helen for getting us into all this trouble, which is now going to last forever, which is quite intimidating. And I'm Sue, Sue Minku, and this is Sophie and Edwina. And we want to introduce the new Journal of Creative Research Methods to you. And by way of introduction, I think I'm going to start by thanking all the people. So Helen for getting us into the trouble, and inspiring JCRM. And then Julia Mortimer our commissioning editor at Bristol University Press, was so supportive and kind and encouraging, and got us even deeper into the trouble. And then all the contributors who are people who've also attended this conference and who are around in the community who've contributed, and the reviewers. So what we really want to do, I think, is to create the community, which has started with reviewers who are not those reviewers, but they're our reviewers, and who've given generously and wisely of their time and experience to help each author be the best author that they could be within the constraints of writing an article or whatever, or a research note or a think piece, or thinking about what sort of creative format they might want to contribute. So that's and oh yes, and all the production people. So and the back of the office at the, you'll see the important email address, JCRM hyphen editorial, no, CRM editorial, CRM, yeah, at bristol.ac.uk. So that's in the journal information that you have in your goodie bag. So that was Kate Spratt and Ella Gibbs, and now Rachel Damage, who's manning or womaning the email inbox. Very important person keeping us together and on task. And Bahamula in marketing, Pia Cook in graphics and marketing, and Rich Kemp as well in marketing. Yeah, so is that everyone? And Edwina, who has kept us on task, getting from the concept to the actual thing. So the fact that it's not just an idea, but is an actual thing, which we are all a bit amazed about, is really very much being held together and supported and encouraged by Edwina Thorne at Bristol University Press. So thank you very much. So yeah, and I had a few points from Harriet. Oh, editorial board members, yes. Also who've supported and got the word out and engaged in different tasks, from chairing the editorial board itself to social media, Trisha King. And we also have an equality, diversity and inclusion person who trying to think about how we can enact policies and be the journal that we want to be. Have I forgotten anything else? No. Harriet then has said to emphasize certain things, and I'm sure that you'll want to jump in and engage with the actual topics and find your topics, be that speculative fiction or social fiction or arts-based methods or whatever it is. But I'd like to encourage you to look at the different formats that we offer. And before you grab onto the actual topic that you're most delighted with, think about what kind of format you'd like to you might fit into, because that kind of leads on to what Harriet wants me to say, that we provide some exciting opportunities for creative formats, and she also wants to especially invite you in her role in knowledge exchange to encourage you to fit in with the knowledge exchange priorities that's in the UK, and invite more translational research, which is for us to be a good space, a great space for you to work with other kinds of authors, collaborators, participants, children of all ages, people of all abilities. What else do we need to know? Yes, we've got a deadline coming up for volume 2 already. So that's in October. So let's start getting ready. You think of your contribution, think about the formats. Please come to us, and also come to us to be the reviewers that you would like to be reviewed by. Yeah, so I think that's all I want to say. Yeah.
Oh, so just to say that Harriet's not here yet, but Harriet, Sue and I will all be available to answer your questions. So if you'd like to ask anything about the journal, about formats or contributions, please find us milling around the conference, but also one of us at some point will be at the Bristol University Press stall, and obviously Green will be there too. So please do just come at us with your ideas or just any questions you've got. We're very happy to answer them.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's all from us.
Cupcakes.
Oh, cupcakes! I've mentioned cupcakes.
We're going to have cupcakes later. That's the really exciting part.
Okay, I think that's enough. Yeah. Thank you. Welcome, welcome.
Well, it's break time now. Yeah.